In the 1935 black and white film titled The Bride of Frankenstein, directed by James Whale, the character of the bride only appears on screen at the very end of the film. She is on screen for just around 5 minutes and has no dialogue whatsoever. In fact, her entire vocal contribution to the film consists of 2 screams, once when she sees and rejects the monster for the first time, and again for good measure, and then she hisses before the monster blows them all up. In her 1818 Gothic novel Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, Mary Shelley sought to convey the consequences of unchecked ambition with a warning that
man should not play God.
the possibility of a female companion for the monster is an unfulfilled concept in the book. In the book, the monster's request for a female companion is used to emphasize the monster's loneliness. After the monster learns to read, it finds a few books discarded in a forest. One of these books is Paradise Lost by John Milton, which is a poetic narration of the story of Adam and Eve. After reading this, the monster fixates on the biblical imagery and longs for a female companion like Eve. The monster then demands that his creator, Dr. Victor Frankenstein, create a female companion for him. In the book, Dr. Frankenstein initially agrees to make the monster a female companion, but then he decides to destroy her before she draws a single breath. In 2026, Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Bride answers the question of what would have happened if the Bride of Frankenstein was brought to life and was given a voice. What would she say? This female monster who was never consulted on whether she wanted to be a mate to a male counterpart. How would she feel? Would she accept her fate, or would she be pretty angry? I watched Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Bride this week, and I have so many thoughts on this film. I have seen polarizing responses to this film, but it was exactly the kind of film that I wanted to watch on The Bride of Frankenstein. It was unhinged, it was chaotic, it was stylish, and it was monstrous in the best way. I was very keen to see it after watching the director Maggie Gyllenhaal in interviews for the promotion of the film. She was very thoughtful in her discourse around the character of the bride, and she explained that in her film, she wanted to finally give the Bride of Frankenstein a voice, with a focus on consent and body autonomy. Despite my love for the film, I saw posts online that shared how The Bride is tracking to be the biggest movie failure of the year, but it was this subtweet that caught my attention. Yes, this is definitely going to be a Jennifer's Body situation in my opinion. See you in 5 to 10 years. And I totally agree with that. When Jennifer's Body was released, critics and audiences hated it, and it bombed at the box office. The response to Jennifer's Body was impacted by the cultural climate in 2009. It took around 10 years as micro-communities began to develop on the internet when, quote, suddenly, seemingly lone fans of the film from different parts of the world could find like-minded individuals through Twitter and Tumblr, and there was an awakening, unquote. The Bride is a very thought-provoking film, and while many reviewers online have slammed it, I think it will find its community as time goes on. Like Jennifer's Body, The Bride is a feminist horror film. In these stories, the inner world of the female monster is finally being explored. The director shared this in a recent interview, quote, "This is a story from a female director from a feminine point of view. The perspective is new and it is feminine," unquote. Also, The Bride cannot be discussed without considering the cultural touchpoints that came before it and the deeply mythologized story of Frankenstein itself. Hello everyone, I'm Tass, and in this video essay I want to delve into all of this, my thoughts on The Bride of 2026, the cultural relevance of the 1935 film The Bride of Frankenstein, and the novel by Mary Shelley. I read it for the first time when I was just a kid, but it's a book that a reader will appreciate with age and life experience, especially in order to interpret the depth and layers to it regarding religion, science, family, death, loss, and autonomy. The 2026 film The Bride opens with a monologue by Mary Shelley as a character in the film. The actress Jessie Buckley, who plays Ida and the bride, also plays this character, and the film is presented as the story that Mary Shelley would have wrote if she focused on the female companion of the monster. Quote, "The black marks across Jessie Buckley's face in the film are in the production's visual conception, the ink of Mary Shelley's own manuscript bleeding out, a woman underground for 2 centuries unable to finish the thought. The Bride is not just a monster story. She is Shelley's most suppressed idea, finally given room to breathe, where every prior adaptation has treated her as a plot function, made, refused, destroyed. The Bride insists she is the subject," unquote. The Bride is set in 1930s Chicago and New York. The film is a love letter to the world of cinema, featuring vintage glamour with a dark punk edge. As someone who loves the 1930s aesthetic, including the architecture, the style, the films, the fashion, and the jazz, this film was so beautiful to me as I sat and experienced it in a movie theater. Jessie Buckley plays Ida, a high-end escort who is subjected to physical and sexual violence at the hands of powerful mobsters. Ida appears to become, quote, possessed, unquote, by the angry ghost of Mary Shelley at the start of the film. During an altercation with two men from the mob, Ida dies, falling down a flight of stairs. We then meet Frank, the monster of Dr. Frankenstein, played by Christian Bale, who finds a, quote, mad doctor, unquote, in Chicago, played by Annette. After more than 100 years of being alone, he wants a female companion for love, fellowship, and touch. He requests the doctor to create one for him. Although the doctor questions the ethics of this at first, the pair ultimately dig up a fresh body. Yes, it is a deceased Ida, and using electricity and machines, the doctor brings her to life. The bride is a version of Ida, talkative, uninhibited, and far from submissive. From the moment she awakens, Frank is enamored by her. Frank is depicted as a movie-loving monster who goes to the movie theater alone to watch black and white movies of his favorite star, Ronnie Reed, very Fred Astaire-coded, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. This clearly influences Frank's movie magic conception of love and romance. There's something endearing about this version of the monster, despite the fact that we know he is lying to the bride about their history and even her name. After the bride and Frank commit some murders, we are introduced to two detectives played by Penelope Cruz and Peter Sarsgaard. The film then takes on a very Bonnie and Clyde storyline, giving the viewer hints of the bride's ties to a brutal Chicago mobster. Her wild and dangerous budding romance with Frank sets the tone for the rest of the film. Where this film truly shines is in its exploration of the themes of autonomy, desire, social exclusion, and the power of, quote, having a voice, unquote. The bride is depicted as an erratic character, very expressive yet contemplative of her situation. The bride speaks a lot in this film, but considering that she has been a mostly silent character for centuries, it makes sense that her character has a lot to say. A very powerful moment in the film occurs when the bride addresses a room of people after she realizes that she knew some of them in her lifetime. With a gun in her hand, she is irate, trying to tell them the harm that she and other women faced at the hands of the powerful men they encountered. She says, quote, "The dead have something to say, and I'm saying it," unquote. This also neatly ties in with the ongoing reference to Mary Shelley speaking through her character in the film. It is also symbolic that the powerful mobster in this film would cut the tongues of the women he wanted to silence, collecting them in macabre jars that he puts on display. We have seen survivors of powerful individuals in real life be silenced in so many ways around the world, and this symbolism is not a coincidence, considering that Maggie Gyllenhaal is such a thoughtful writer and director. Somewhat similar to the introduction in the 2026 adaptation is the 1935 Bride of Frankenstein introductory scene. This scene features the character of Mary Shelley, played by Elsa Lanchester, the same actress who played the Bride of Frankenstein later in the film. In the 1935 film, Mary Shelley tells the characters of her husband and Lord Byron that there is more of her famous story to tell. The 1935 Bride of Frankenstein had an immense impact on pop culture, mainly because of her striking appearance. This character and her very distinctive look has been referenced in other films and entertainment media. As the bride, Elsa Lanchester is tall and angular, wearing a long white gown and sporting her now signature lightning-striped hairdo. She is, like the original creature, scarred, but carefully so along her jawline, as if to emphasize how sharply gorgeous its lines are. Many academics argue that when a monster is female, she or it is positioned as an object, where the female body is subjected to the male gaze. Because of this, the visual aspect of the female monster's cinematic narrative becomes important. There has been an unspoken requirement that female monsters must conform to beauty standards and acceptable femininity in some way in order to be afforded love in films. We see this in The Bride as well. Despite the marks on her face and her wild hairdo, somewhat referential to Elsa Lanchester's 1935 look, she's still a thin and conventionally attractive woman. Interestingly, the film to a small extent addresses this ongoing critique in the horror genre. When Frank unwraps and sees Ida's lifeless body for the first time in the doctor's lab, he comments and says that she is too beautiful to be his female companion. In the 1935 sequel, the character of the Bride of Frankenstein contributed to the silencing of the female monster. Only when she rejects the monster through screaming is the viewer left with an eerie and unsettling feeling. Is she a monster? Is she human? Is she a machine? Or is she an animal? Quote, she was made for a man who disgusted her in a world that gave her no say in the matter, and then she was gone, unquote. Feminist scholars have read this as an assertion of sexual autonomy and agency, a rejection of patriarchal control and refusal of the role of wife and mother. She is a powerful symbol of defiance, and both costume and voice become tools for future brides to say no to their fate. Lanchester's bride, however, is not able to invent alternative possibilities for herself and is ultimately destroyed by the male creature, punished for her rebellion. In Mary Shelley's novel, the monster is attracted to human women, but their fear and rejection of him as a result of his appearance is what leads him to request a female companion who is like him. Quote, I took it. It was a portrait of a most lovely woman. In spite of my malignity, it softened and attracted me. For a few moments, I gazed with delight on her dark eyes, fringed by deep lashes, and her lovely lips. But presently, my rage returned. I remembered that I was forever deprived of the delights that such beautiful creatures could bestow, and that she whose resemblance I contemplated would, in regarding me, have changed that air of divine benignity to one expressive of disgust and affright. In the book, the monster promises that if Dr. Victor Frankenstein creates a female companion for him, he will go with her to, quote, the vast wilds of South America, unquote, never to be seen or heard of again. The monster reasons that his female companion would be forced to accept him because they would only have each other. In the book, it is Dr. Victor Frankenstein who considers the female monster may think and act independently of her male counterpart. Quote, she, meaning the female monster, might become 10,000 times more malignant than her mate and delight for its own sake in murder and wretchedness. He, meaning the male monster, had sworn to quit the neighborhood of man and hide himself in deserts, but she had not, and she who in all probability was to become a thinking and reasoning animal might refuse to comply with the compact, meaning a contract made before her creation. They might even hate each other. The creature who already loathed his own deformity, and might he not conceive a greater abhorrence for it when it came before his eyes in the female form? She also might turn with disgust from him to the superior beauty of man. She might quit him, and he be again alone, exasperated by the fresh provocation of being deserted by one of his own species. This paragraph is especially important from Mary Shelley's original text because it conveys the writer's thoughts to the reader regarding the female monster having autonomy. In the book, Dr. Frankenstein also considers the possibility that the female and male monster may procreate, and this would, in his opinion, unleash further horrors onto mankind. Quote, the story of Frankenstein is controlled by the voices of 3 male narrators. The female monster is a fascinating character due to the extent of her silence. She is never allowed to speak or indeed to live. As well as being a silenced character, the female monster is thus a metaphor for silence itself. Her unfinished body represents or reminds us of her incomplete story and the abrupt way in which she's banished from the narrative of Frankenstein when Victor casts her into the sea. Basically, what happens in the book is that Victor destroys the unfinished body of the female monster and he throws her into the sea. That's what they're referencing at the end. It can therefore be argued that the silence of the female monster and her unfinished narrative in the book invites retellings in film and media. So a film like The Bride, in which this idea is fleshed out even further, was so satisfying to watch as someone who loves the book. It is also important to note that Mary Shelley's mother was the first major feminist theorist in the English-speaking language who wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Her father was a radical philosopher for his time, so her intellectual upbringing is reflected in her work. Also, her mother died 2 weeks after she was born, and Mary Shelley had a very fraught relationship with her father and stepmother. This lack of paternal warmth is reflected in Frankenstein. Mary Shelley experienced a lot of death in her family in her lifetime. 3 of her 4 children died, 1 as a baby and 2 in childhood. Her preoccupation with death and bringing a lifeless body back to the realm of the living makes more sense after knowing her life story. we as viewers today are experiencing more feminist horror stories, and I'm so glad. In the film, the bride actively learns to say, quote, "I'd prefer not to," unquote. It's another way for her to reclaim her voice and effectively to learn to say no instead of just being agreeable and submissive. She even says this when Frank asks her to marry him, and he is delighted by her response, which I loved. One of the most interesting ways that adaptations work is to fill in gaps and imagine the lives of characters beyond the end of their story in the original work. Quote, "She finds herself in such an insane situation," Gyllenhaal said, promoting the film, "having been brought back from the dead without her consent to be the wife of someone that she's never met," unquote. In the book, The Monstrous Feminine by Professor Barbara Creed, the writer explains that female monstrosity on screen is not simply a female version of the male monster. It's something more specific, rooted in the female body itself, in reproduction, sexuality, and generative power. The horror of the bride is not in what she might do, but it is in her existence itself. In the book, Dr. Frankenstein does not fear the female monster. She is not alive at that point. He fears what the female monster represents, a woman with agency. The bride as a dramatic character has been part of a series of creative reimaginings through an explicitly feminist lens for a while. For instance, the dark comedy Lisa Frankenstein in 2024 imagined the bride in the role of a scientist who accidentally brings to life a young Victorian man. Released just a year earlier, Poor Things in 2023 brought an even more complex exploration of power, agency, and consent set in a retro-futuristic Victorian era when the female creature Bella, played by Emma Stone, negotiates what it means to be both a scientific object and creator. Since her inception, the bride's struggle has been for autonomy, and with this film, she finally obtains it. With the 2026 adaptation, the viewer is not left with questions at all. We are forced to face the bride and listen to her point of view, her ramblings, and her feelings on consent in the very ethically grey circumstances in which she is brought to life. Guys, thank you for watching. I hope you've watched The Bride to determine how you feel about it on your own. Let me know if you liked it or if you didn't like it. I've seen a lot of criticism for this film, but I think it will find appreciation as time goes on. I also wanted to add, if you want to watch the 1935 Bride of Frankenstein film referenced in this video, it is available freely on the Internet Archive. Boris Karloff stars as the monster, and of course Elsa Lanchester is in the dual role of Mary Shelley and the Bride of Frankenstein. Also, go and read Frankenstein. It's an excellent book, and it does make you appreciate the film a bit more. And I hope you enjoyed the video. See you in the next one.